This is an Agnostic Agile Unplugged live event on the 29th of July. Nabil Zawadi will moderate this event for you and introduce a fantastic lineup of speakers who will talk about project management and how it's compatible with agile ways of working.
Okay, so what we're going to do is I'm going to ask each of our lovely panelists for a quick intro, just so I don't do the history any disservice. So perhaps, Steve, you'd like to just give a quick intro to yourself before we start?
I was hoping you'd make me last. Steve Lawrence. I'm a New Zealand cultural ambassador living in Australia, bringing some class and culture to these heathens. Tried it for about 10 years in London and failed miserably there as well. So basically, I'm a failure. I've been doing Agile since about 2005, and I've been a full-time Agile coach since 2008. I got my PMP certification as a project manager in 2005, and that same year I got my Scrum Master certificate as well, and that sort of moved the traditional way of thinking to the side. So I've seen a lot, done a lot, failed a lot, and learned a lot.
Great to hear. Thank you very much. Sam, would you like to intro next?
Yeah, sure. My name is Sam Zawadi, no relation to Nabil.
Not at all.
No, there is. He's my brother. I actually am originally from London, so I'm now here in Melbourne. I've been here for around 3 years, and I have roughly 13 to 15 years rough experience in Agile, and predominantly in delivery as well as coaching and training and so on. So actually, I am the initial author of Agnostic Agile, but co-founded it with one person who's on this call who reviewed the initial copy, Melanie. I don't think we have any others. Oh, Adrian's on this call
Adrian
as well.
Is on.
Adrian as well, yeah. So, so hence the meetup, and I'm really excited, actually. This is my connection back home. So hello, everyone. I'll be with you soon, I hope. That's me.
Awesome, thank you. So, Mike, your turn.
Hi everyone, Mike. I'm a Bristol boy from the UK, so apologies for the accent. Based in Sydney now, so I'm a recovering Agile coach, a whiskey collector and drinker, father, husband. So worked in various organisations in the UK and also here in Australia. And I've now kind of left the Agile coaching part of my career behind, and I'm now a digital accelerator lead, whatever that means. So maybe I'll share with you later on what that means, but yeah, that's me.
Awesome. Okay, guys, thank you very much for the intros. So why don't we just get straight to it then? So the first question I thought to start us off is just to set the scene for the rest of the discussions. Let's start with some definitions. So Sam, perhaps you would like to take this one. Could you please define in your own words what a project is, what project management is, and maybe what a project manager is as well, just so we're all talking from the same hymn sheet.
Yeah, sure. Let's look at what does Prince 2 say a project is, and I think it's very similar with PMI. It's probably a good place to start. And I don't have this information in my head, but roughly speaking, a project is a temporary construct or some kind of venture, an investment that the organization invests in order to produce some kind of outcome, right? Be it technological, business, or whatever. It's some kind of benefit outcome. And a project is, traditionally speaking, made up of certain things, certain elements. You have a project plan, you have a budget, you have a scope, timescale, and so on. So when the scope of the project is completed, that is said to be the end of the project, almost. There's a change part at the end, but basically you're near the end of the project, if not the end. So that's how I would define what is a project by using the Prince 2 / PMI definition. What is project management? Well, it's a person who manages the project. However, I would say project management is the discipline for delivering that project. And so the discipline includes different stages, different phases of a project, for example. Things like initiate, plan, develop, test, deploy, support, that kind of thing. And there are built-in processes and structures into the traditional methods to enable all of that to happen. And so that's how I would describe project management generally. Okay, I've had to bring back a lot of things from the past there, but that was interesting. I hope that was on point.
Nothing too harrowing, I hope.
Yeah, nothing too harrowing, yeah. Melanie's here, shut up now.
Awesome. Okay, so we've had some definitions. Steve and Mike, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think Sam covered it pretty well.
Yeah, good work, Sam.
Cool.
Awesome. Okay, now on to the real questions, the meaty ones. We're going to start off with a controversial one as well. So a lot of people in the Agile industry, I've noticed, and I know some of you will have noticed as well, have different opinions on project management and project managers. Why do you think there is a stigma associated with project management and project managers in the Agile industry? Perhaps, Mike, you'd like to start us off with this one?
Good question. I think that I've got to bring it in, but if you look at the Agile Manifesto, everything on the right is essentially what project manager is drawn towards. So following a plan, comprehensive documentation, processes and tools, and God, you're gonna test me on the last one. Contract negotiation. So contract negotiation is essentially you've given me a load of money and a load of scope and requirements and a date to hit it by, and I've signed the bottom of this piece of paper and I'm going to deliver it for you. So ultimately, I think that if you look at that and then you look at what the role or traditional role of a project manager is, ultimately they're most polar opposites of what we want to try and achieve in Agile. That's probably why they have the stigma. But I think that they're all human beings. Some of them have been friends of mine. So I think that they all go into work and have a job to do. And I think that some of it's unfair. I've come from a traditional project background, in a traditional BA in a waterfall environment. And there's some great managers out there that I'd work for again in a heartbeat. And I think that most of it's behavioral. The last thing I want to add is slightly around when I was thinking back in my career, most grads who graduated in mid-90s in an IT world, had aspirations of being a project manager because there was a status associated with it. There was money. There was you were rewarded for the job that you did. And so when Agile came in, we're all kind of going in there saying, well, you're no longer needed. There's a lot of resistance that occurred in that space as well. So a lot of knives and shields came up. And I think that we've worked hard recently to solve that problem. But I think that's really, my view anyway, as to why there's a stigma associated with project management.
No, great answer. Thank you. Sam, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think Mike, brought up a really good point. I would add to that, just as there is so many different flavors of Agile, there are so many different flavors of project manager, right? And actually project management. And so it's a curious question for me why we tend to paint all project managers as waterfall and hierarchical and command and control, just generally speaking, and all project management as big batch waterfall types of ways of working. I think, of course, traditionally and historically, that tends to be true in terms of what a project is, given its nature of big batch. But I also think that I have met and worked with so many amazing project managers delivering those kinds of projects, who I would put them first and foremost before a lot of Scrum Masters I meet, for example, right? Because they've got those skills that Mike was talking about. They've got it all wrapped up in one. And so there are different types of people. That's a good point.
Great. Okay. Speaking of the different types, so what would you say the role of an Agile project manager is? And is it congruent with Agile values and principles? Perhaps, Steve, if you'd like to kick that one off.
Yeah, thanks for throwing that one at me. I think the role of an Agile PM is different than the traditional PM. The traditional PM is predominantly you're given, your project's already been given to in terms of the start and the end dates, the scope you have to deliver. So you're pretty much gold on delivering what's been given to you rather than working with a team to understand what you need to actually deliver and how you're going to go about delivering it. I think an Agile PM is far more aligned to the servant leadership type of leadership approach rather than a management approach. But I always think of an Agile PM as the glue who sits across the top and provides the support, the structure, the environment, and the general support for a team or teams of teams to be successful. So they sit across the top rather than just digging down into the detail. But they've got to be more empowering and more supportive and providing that psychological safety for teams to call out, hey, this isn't going to work, or what can we do differently to try and get this thing across the line. And unfortunately, an Agile PM will do a lot more of what we'd call pure admin, moving away from the team. So taking that admin away from the teams and allowing the teams to get the work done, but providing that support and glue and the big picture view. So I think there's definitely a role for them. I think it definitely aligns up with the Agile values and principles. It's just, as Sam was talking, a lot of it comes down to the behavioural mindset behind those people.
Yeah. Anything else to add, guys?
Yeah, I'd add that I think there is absolutely a place and absolutely value that Agile project management adds. So what do we mean by Agile project management? Being from the UK, I'm most familiar with the DSDM method or the Agile PM method. I think it's a fantastic method. DSDM has what I think it's 8 principles from memory. And Alistair Coburn, one of the co-authors of the Agile Manifesto, said maybe 2 or 3 years ago, you'll find it on YouTube, he goes, if you want to look at what good Agile principles are, go and look at the DSDM principles. He said that, right? They're really good principles. And for me, the nature, just what Steve was saying, the nature of the Agile project manager in terms of role is really not to manage the work, not to manage the people, but to manage the environment around that, around the people and around the work. Make sure the autonomy is there, make sure the empowerment is there. But also to what Steve says, they have to do all that admin still as well. Who's going to manage the budget? It's at the end of the day, it's a project with a start date and an end date. And that's the big difference for me. Although in Agile PM, the method, you deliver iteratively, of course, and you can use Scrum or the DSDM method specifically, you still have a start date and an end date because it's a project. And by nature, all projects have a start date and an end date because they're an investment. So I think there's a lot of value, and I think that it's especially useful to use as a transitionary method into Agile. So if you're working in an environment with a strong PMO, more of a traditional ways of working culture, doing something like Agile PM with a good Agile-minded project manager can be a really good transition step to a purer form of Agile, quote unquote. Yeah, that's what I'd say to that.
I think it leads back to that first question around the stigma as well. You hear, I want to be a little bit controversial, fire it up a little bit, sorry about that. But you hear the Agile Zealots say, we don't need project managers, the Scrum Master or the product owner can do that. But is the Scrum Master the person that's going to go and talk to the senior exec and say, look, we don't have enough money to get this work done? And if they're doing that and they're fighting those fights, who's actually supporting and leading the team and facilitating the team and helping the team be successful? And then they come back with the argument, well, the product owner can do it. But the product owner's role is to understand what the core requirements and the value we're going to deliver, and they should be interfacing with the SMEs and the stakeholders to understand the exact why, and then translating that back and working closely with the team. So there is that gap in the middle where the project manager definitely has the role, and I think the Scrum Zealots are missing the value that they actually bring to the process rather than the costs they bring. And I think we're still stuck back in that mindset where the project manager, the people cracking the whip, trying to get work done without actually being aligned to the teams, and more aligned to the management side of it.
And just one more thing from me. So I worked in an environment where I was an Agile project manager. Well, I've been one a few times. So one in particular from memory, where actually my project was to build the team, to build the Agile team. It didn't exist yet. So we needed a business case and all of the associated documentation and process to go through. We build the team, build the first version of the product. That's the project end date. Once we've got the first version of the product, it then goes into a product development cadence. And that's not necessarily bound by the constructs of a project. you could be off more into the agile worlds then. So an agile project could be to deliver the foundation, if you like, of what will be the product development cadence.
No, that's a great point. And yeah, a couple of you touched on like the differences between a Scrum Master, for example, and an Agile Project Manager. So do you think that the Scrum roles, as described in the Scrum Guide, can work alongside an Agile Project Manager? There's a lot of talk around how, if you have a fully set up Scrum team, you don't need an Agile Project Manager. But we've touched on some elements like finance, for example, in senior discussions where that's not necessarily part of a Scrum Master's remit. So maybe, Mike, do you have any thoughts on how, if they can work together and if there's any friction or overlap potentially?
So before I answer that, which I'll get to it in a second, I think that we need to just be clear around Agile and a transformation around Agile. And I think that contextually most organizations are at various levels of maturity. And the general view is that a true Agile organization is an organization that's continually transforming. So there's no end state. So as an organization, all organizations are at various states. And so, good on you, you're taking the first step. You're introducing a framework like Scrum and you're forming teams and you're breaking some of those traditional silos. But there's still organizational constructs that still haven't been broken down yet. And over a period of time, who knows, we still may find a way to break some of those. But it's not to say that the organization isn't agile yet. And so there still needs to be somebody or an area that still needs to support and manage annual funding cycles and how do I get my money, and finance teams that are still asking for what am I going to get and how much is it going to cost and when you're going to deliver it by kind of conversations. And so still working towards changing organizations to do that, and at the moment project management is employed to manage those traditional setups with organizations. So can they work together? 100%. I think they can work together. I think the problem comes when Scrum Master purism is viewed around, hey, well, I think the friction happens when the Scrum team are working with a project manager who doesn't really treat it, who is essentially employed to drag the project over the line. So break some of those traditional agile values and principles, which is, there's no such thing as sustainable pace. I'm the hero. I generally will pull this thing through. We talked about cracking the whip earlier on. I think that is where the friction comes between, the Agile Scrum team wants to work in this particular way, and the rest of the organization and pressure that the project manager is under is still driving those traditional senses across onto the team. And if I'm a project manager and I'm measured in particular ways, and as an organization, that's really how we work, you can only go so far in the Scrum team. So I think that, yes, they can work together, but if there's friction, it's only because we're at a level of maturity in the organization at the moment, and we just need to find a way to learn from it.
Brilliant, thank you. Sam or Steve, do you have anything to add to that?
I just want to say one thing I think maybe we're forgetting. Not everything has to be or even should be agile, right? So what are some of the features of a traditionally run project? Why might you want to use something like Prince 2 or any traditional kind of waterfall method when the solution is repeatable? There's there's going to be very little variation in requirements or scope change, etc., etc. Why would you have a Scrum process, for example, for that? It's actually waste. Do what works because the nature of the project. So I'm not the kind of person who will paint the whole world agile. There are some initiatives which by nature are suited to much less agility than we actually need.
Sam, could I slightly add to that though?
Yeah.
I think that the framework that we choose to use still should, if you want to be a real view around an agile organization, this is my view, still should have some underlying behavioral and cultural things in place. And as long as you have that openness, that thing around sustainable, as an organization, if that foundation is in place, then yeah, I agree with you, Sam. I think that there is you pick and choose what's right for you, but there still needs to be a particular agile culture, if you want to call it that sits within the organization to manage that. I mean, a side note, somebody told me recently that the biggest thing they've learned and developed in the last 5 years was resilience. And I think that that's a big problem. That I think that culturally, even if you call yourself an agile organization, I think that there's the culture problem is the big one normally.
So let me throw this out, and I really want to hear what Steve thinks. Take a traditional project manager, right? Empower that person with the ability to coach, with things like empathy, having coaching conversations, uplifting the team, mentoring, and so on. And what have you done? You've taken, just to Mike's point, you're starting to change the culture by people who are actually having those conversations with higher management, right? And with the teams. And I think that's fantastic. You can keep your traditional ways of working where they're suited, but as Mike says, I think it's fantastic. What a thought experiment, right? If you have that that culture, what we call the agile culture, built into those ways of working, I think that's fantastic. Great.
Awesome.
So what do you think, Steve?
I don't know. I think, in a way, I think Scrum's done a huge disservice to the Agile movement. I'll just throw that out there. If we go back to the Agile Manifesto, I mean, those 12 principles, if we substitute a couple of the words from software to outcomes or solutions, it still holds so true to everything we do. And there's nothing in there that says you have to be Scrum. There's nothing in there that says you must do time boxes and it must be 2 weeks and you need a Scrum Master. It's all about how do we deliver a quality product to our customers sooner, with empowered people, with getting lots of feedback along the way. And the concepts are quite simple. And I think you can apply them to any project, whether it's waterfall, whether it's agile, whatever. It's just a different way of thinking. And I think if people keep going way down the Scrum rabbit hole, then they lose a lot of the value that those principles and they're actually trying to adhere to. So I think we've got to bring ourselves back to what the original intent behind the Agile Manifesto was, and then apply the Scrum framework or Scaled Agile framework or DAD or Flex, whatever it is, or Kanban, apply it in a way that suits the organization, but trying to get to those goals that were in those first 12 principles.
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant point, and really glad that you touched upon it. So I've seen a lot of people say that, why do you need project management if we have Scrum? Scrum does the job for us. So what do you think project management provides that Scrum doesn't? Maybe Steve, if you'd like to continue.
I think project management provides a big picture view. So your Scrum team is, for all intents and purposes, it's your engine. And if your engine's not running smoothly, you're not going anywhere. But you need someone to have a wider view. What is their roadmap? What is their purpose? What is the work that's coming into our engine? And they've got to provide that big picture view, but also have the skills and ability to distill that down into the various delivery teams so they know the value that they are delivering and hopefully get an emotional connection to the work because then the quality goes up. But they've actually got to be that go-between between the senior execs and strategy and the teams doing the work. So they've got a real core role to play, but it's finding those PMs with the right behavioural traits that see it as a servant leadership role rather than a command and control role.
Definitely.
And that probably the organisation KPIs need to change as well.
Yeah. Sam or Mike, do you have anything to add to that?
Sam.
Oh, okay.
Sam,
Look, not really. I think the only thing I'd add is that, and because I've been in this situation before, okay, who pays for the Scrum team and why do they exist in the first place? They don't magically appear in the organization. They are some kind of investment from somewhere within the organization. And probably if you're dealing with an enterprise or even a medium-sized organization, it's probably come from some kind of budget that links to a portfolio initiative, that links to some kind of strategic initiative, etc. Probably. So it's very interesting because I think to Steve's point, a lot of Scrum advocates, of which I am one, by the way, but just not a hardcore one. I love Scrum, it has its place, but they don't realize that there's more to the world. There's the bigger picture. And when we say bigger picture, I don't want to speak for Steve, but I'm not just referring to the product and what we're building. That's product owner's got that in hand. I'm referring to as well the organization itself, why we're here, who's paying for us, and what the benefits are we're actually delivering both to the customers and back into the organization. And I do think the project manager or the project management function, be it PMO, etc., really helps to glue that together and keeps it ticking, and it's invisible. I was having a conversation with Mike earlier. We both worked in a similar environment here in Australia, and although we do agile ways of working in some places within that environment, it's completely invisible that that environment once upon a time was a line in the business plan, owned by a traditional delivery mechanism, project management, program management, PMO, portfolio, whatever it was. And it actually had a cost benefits analysis, a full business case, and it's why they're there in the first place. And it's completely invisible to them, right? So that's the only thing I'd add.
Brilliant, yeah. And I think that might be one of the reasons why the Scrum framework is so light, so that it can be compatible with the wider organization, what they have to do. But just taking a question from the audience, because it seems to be quite relative. Melanie asks, so if project managers provide the big picture view, what is the role of the program manager? Sam, you're smirking, so maybe you have an answer for that?
I'm always smirking now. I don't have, well, no, I have a perspective on it. My perspective is, this is an interesting one because I haven't really seen this term Agile Program Manager bandied around too much. Although I would define it in a similar way, I would define Agile Project Management. And my focus would be on the culture that Mike was talking about, the mindset, the principles, and so on. That would be my focus. But to answer that, the first thing that comes to mind, love it or hate it, is safe. Because when I think about a program, what is a program structure traditionally? A program contains a number of projects that contribute to deliver the program outcome over a period of years, usually 5 years or so, depending on the size of the program. And so the closest analogy in the agile ways of working world or the at scale world would be safe, because the layer of safe that maps to would be the essential safe level in version 5 or the program level in version 4, where you have the RTE, the release train engineer, which is kind of like the agile program manager. I'm being very loose with my definitions, by the way. Except it's basically the chief scrum master, the big scrum master in a way. And you have all the little scrum masters and so on. I hope you get my drift. But they're collaborating and they're syncing and so on and so forth. Yeah, I was being a bit funny with the science. It's relative estimation.
Following on from what Sam said, take a typical Scrum team, think of them as cross-functional. Then elevate the next layer above that. You've got a project team, and you're trying to make them cross-functional. It's putting the support structure and the layers above to support the teams doing the work. If we think of the Agile project manager as the glue for a particular outcome, but it might be part of the puzzle, it won't be the whole puzzle. The program manager should be the glue across all of it. And it's a coordination, it's a facilitation, it's an alignment, and it's trying to get all the dots in a row so that hopefully when push comes to shove, you can deliver a positive outcome. And I'll give you a real example of what used to happen in a telecommunications company here in Australia. They had different parts of the business, in the tech business, they called constructors. And each constructor would be given a project which was a part of the bigger piece of the puzzle. And these constructors would deliver their work, and they'd get to call it the try line. I'm a rugby guy, so I want to use the try line, ready to deliver. But they had a release manager there. He'd put up the big handbrake and saying, no, I can't deliver your piece of work until the rest of these other bits of the puzzle come along. Otherwise, we'll take the whole system down. But the project managers were actually gold on getting their work into production. So they tried to get the release manager sacked, who was stopping their work going through into production, because it wasn't a program manager role sitting across the whole lot, just organising, coordinating and facilitating. So they were all ready to drop at the same time. They were all in the same release process. and it all was seamless. No one was doing that role, so it became very much a them and us, and it was very confrontational, and it created a whole lot of angst within the entire organisation, purely because they didn't have that coordination and the facilitation role to bring it all together.
Yeah, so yeah, you talk about the extra layer above, if that's relevant for the situation. That's great. Mike, do you have anything to add to this program manager debate?
No, I think the guys covered it off well.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, good. And I guess the same would apply to portfolio management as well, because obviously that's the third P we have there. So do you guys want to add anything to portfolio, or is it just more of the same, like, you know, a layer above the program? Steve, I'm not sure if you have any thoughts on portfolio management.
No, Sam's going to come in behind. I think portfolio management aligns very closely to strategy. So what's in your portfolio work for each business unit should align straight back to strategy, and you should be able to prioritize all your called initiatives, epics, projects, programs, whatever is in there. Yep. You should be able to align to your strategic direction and your portfolio work. Ideally, there should be some funding line in behind that, so you know what funds you've got available to spend, so you can actually start prioritizing your work. Then you start bringing it into your delivery system where you've got capacity and capability to support it. But the portfolio needs to start delivering off against your strategic goals. That's my own personal view.
I agree 100%. Like, nothing to add to that.
Lots of thumbs up, and I can see in the comments that other people agree with you also. Brilliant. Okay, so another interesting one that also in the comments we've touched upon. So broadly speaking, organizations organize themselves in one of two ways, product-oriented or project-oriented. And, you know, that determines how they structure the teams and, you know, how they prioritize things perhaps. So what do you think the advantages and disadvantages are of these approaches? And perhaps just to start us off, we can briefly describe what we mean by product-oriented and project-oriented. So, Mike, do you have any thoughts on this one?
Oh, so it's a real broad question. Coming up, I'll talk to Sam a little bit around this subject earlier on today. I don't really have a brilliant answer, but I'll try and use some examples that are pretty close to me at the moment, which I might try and chuck in there. One of the things that I think about when I think about project is it's handed off to somebody, talk about the project manager, and their sole responsibility is to deliver the scope or requirements. The connection to the benefits and the ownership of those benefits and finding out whether or not it's created the outcome that we plan to generally doesn't sit. Most projects I've been on is a death march at the end, and we delivered, and a few late nights, and what a wonderful thing we had, and we all crack open the champagne, have a drink, and get drunk. Especially in the UK, weirdly, that used to happen quite a lot. Whereas we don't really ask and follow up whether or not they actually did the outcome. In fact, most people on that project don't really care. They move on to the next one. The difference between that, if you own a product, I guess, would be you're responsible end to end. You have an accountability for what you put into that in terms of the value and the outcome. I think listening to the early conversations as well, what we were talking about was, I think that when the Scrum team in traditional projects get formed, it's kind of landed right in the middle of that project, and they're now just, to Steve's point, the engine. But I think they've lost that disconnect in terms of what the true intent was behind it, which was, the product owner's there who's connected with the product and the customer, and we're all measuring ourselves on value and outcome. So if I now try and answer your question a little bit more deeply, closer to what I do, so I work in like a rather large program of work. We're talking like, let's just say it's a lot of money. And it's been running for a number of years, and we're essentially rewriting an entire core platform. And that's a project, that's a massive program of work. We're talking like 1,700, 1,500 people working on that program. And that's ran traditionally by projects. They've got, reporting, they've got, change requests, all sorts of stuff coming in. What I do is I look after this thing called Digital Accelerators, where we're trying to put look for opportunities across the business to see what we could digitize to have a thin veneer that sits across the top in terms of a window to our customers. So we're digitizing stuff and APIing into this core stack. And so people come to us with ideas, and my team assess those ideas. We own that kind of the mini digital platform that sits on the top. Mm. They come to my team and we go, okay, what's the problem you're trying to solve? Give me the data that supports that problem. What do you think your solution is? And then we get them to pitch to the execs, and they've got a 10-minute pitch every quarter. And the execs have got a bank statement, and they've got like $1 million to spend this quarter. And those 15 pitches, they'll decide what they want to invest in. And so my team then are responsible for that delivery in that quarter. And then at the end, we play back the results, and the product owner then has to re-pitch again to say, well, I now want to scale the idea. And the execs can go, sorry, we're not going to invest in that anymore. We're going to go invest in something else. So you could argue that, to Sal's point earlier, they're small batches of work. So they're small projects. We're still asking for a mini business case to be written. We're still asking for a benefits profile. We're still asking for evidence and data to back up and support your problem. We're just doing it in small quarterly chunks of work and not necessarily massive pieces of work. And so I think that the difference between project and a project setup and a product setup, I think the construct, to Sam's earlier point, in terms of what a project is there's still someone still needs to pay for you to be in your day job. You still need to justify the value that you're delivering to that particular product and project. So we're just making smaller batch sizes. I don't know if I've answered the question, but I was just kind of trying to give the distinction between a project. Generally, people don't care too much about the value outcome, and if you're on a product, you do have an accountability end to end for that outcome and the value that you build.
I'm trying to throw something in that Mike. So if we think of a product and think of something like let's call it an SAP or a Salesforce implementation as a product, and then you've got a project wanting to plug something into that. The question I would own is, who owns the sanctity and the stability and the quality of that Salesforce product, and how does the project make sure they deliver something in line with that? And I think we leverage application architects, solution architects, and enterprise architects to help us get there. But the product manager type role, correct me if I'm wrong, Mike, seems to be moving further away. They don't have so much of a say in what actually happens in their particular product. It's just accept the thing and you'll get what we're giving you.
I think that in the traditional program sense, we're trying to, we're using agile terminology for what is essentially a very traditional program of work. And so I don't think, I don't know if I'm answering your question, Steve, because I think that what I'm trying to do in terms of when you talk about particular Salesforce implementation, I think that the biggest challenge that we have is owning end-to-end that whole entire customer journey and outcome. I think that's fundamentally the piece that we miss a lot with these setups. And I think that for me would be true product management, is to really own that fully thing end-to-end rather than that small component.
So I've got a slide to share. Steve, I just saw your chat message. Do you want me to bring up the slide now?
I just want to respond to Mike on that one, because recently I was a head of transformation for an organisation. Had a very big UK client, and this UK client supports rugby, so of course I love them. But they were a product company masquerading as a consulting company, if that makes sense. So what they were doing, they delivered everything on a project focus rather than a product focus. And what the end result was, they had this, someone actually drew a picture, and it was just like a ball of wool, and that was their product. And no one knew how to integrate into that product. And if they did some functionality, they knew someone had probably built it for a different project somewhere else, but they didn't know where it was stored, any of the documentation that says how they did it. They couldn't find it in the code, so they just kept building something new and kept plugging it in. So this thing was pretty much unsupportable. you couldn't actually deliver anything with any sort of quality or speed through the. And I see Steve Prince is down the bottom there. He's probably smiling and laughing at this because he was part of that puzzle. But it was moving away from understanding what product versus project was, and no sanctity or quality over that product. So in the end, they lost a massive deal because they lost that focus. There was no quality control. There was no management of the product. It was just throw everything at it. I think it's a huge risk that organisations need to be mindful of.
Mm.
Sam, do you have anything to add to that?
Not really. I think the guys did a really good justice. The only thing I'd add is that I'll just give you a real life story, a very quick one. I was working as an Agile PM in an organisation where I was working alongside the product director because what I was delivering was a particular version of his product, right? So there was a fixed scope in that situation particularly, but it was part of a much wider product roadmap. But they needed something specific for a specific point in time, and they needed a delivery expert in to help make that happen. So the two can absolutely coexist, but I can't really add anything beyond. I think Mike covered it extensively, as did Steve.
Perfect. Okay. Awesome. Okay, guys, thank you very much for the answers on that one. Do you have, so one little follow-up is I've seen a lot of organizations shift from project to products. Do you have, it seems to be a trend in the industry, do you have any advice for that transition from projects to products? Like if an organization were to undertake that transition? Sam, do you have any thoughts?
From projects to products, well, okay, yes, I would say, firstly, do we know why we're doing that? Like, what do we plan to get? How do we plan to benefit? I think, like any agile transformation, let's root it in why actually we are doing this. Is it to follow a trend? Because that's a very important question, especially in enterprises. Because what happens is you end up following a trend and the transformation isn't deep enough. So I think why is important. That's a really big one too. But again, look, I'm going to come back to the subject of this meetup. This is where I think an agile project manager, right? And when I say that, I'm thinking, you know, everything that, for example, Agile PM embodies, DSDM embodies, because it's got all that culture stuff there that Mike was talking about. I think that role can play a pivotal transitional role within the organization when moving from a project-based culture, which is big batch, let's get these big batches through. A project is just a large batch, if you think about it. But an agile way of working, or a product cadence, is small batches on cadence, right? So I think that kind of thing needs to be understood by the person who is helping to transition from project to product. And that the person helping to do that, whatever her role may be, needs to be able to articulate the whys and the benefits of certain ways of working. And that's kind of what I'd add right now. I'll throw it open to Mike and Steve to give additional answers.
I'm happy with your answer. I think we've lost Steve, haven't we?
Yeah, he's gone.
Yes.
I think he was so unhappy with your answer that he left.
Sorry, Steve. That would be the first time. Maybe he's trying to knock and get back in. I'm not sure. On the meetup?
I think Ivana will definitely let him in. I hope she will let him in, at least. Cool. Well, no worries. While he rejoins, why don't we go on to our next question? So we kind of touched on this already, but I just wanted to address it again. Do we still need project management and project managers if we're agile? So if an organization has achieved a high level of business agility, agile within the teams, do we still need project management and project managers? So Sam, do you have any opening thoughts?
Yeah. I want to throw it back to you this time because you're putting us on the spot this whole meetup. But I don't think it's black and white. I've never, what does it mean to be agile versus to not be agile? There are many different shades of gray here, right? So agility is a spectrum, not a switch. And that's what I will keep coming back to. there is always going to be a level, I don't really like the word maturity in this situation particularly, but there'll be a level of agility that the organization doesn't yet have, but needs to attain. But that doesn't mean you're all the way down the super with Spotify kind of agile, right? Because you don't, in the enterprise, doesn't need to be that agile. It's just as simple as that. They need to have the appropriate levels of agility to compete in their market with what they're doing. So I think that it still is important to have, well, firstly, you always have non-agile projects anyway. There's still a need for non-agile projects. That's the first thing I'd say. And the second thing I'd say, I still come back to the agile project manager and that transitionary role that person can really help play and really drive into the organization. So delivering an agile project, you see, guys, this is how we can do it. We did it, we're successful, right? Okay, could we maybe do something bigger next time, right? And then before you know it, you'll be doing iterative development, probably within agile budget guardrails, and rather than within the confines of a project. So I think the key thing is agile project managers, if they're placed correctly, and if you get the right people, they can really help the organization move towards agility. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's my perspective.
No, it does, definitely. It's a great perspective. Mike, your mouth is open as if you're...
I agree, Sam. I know. Yeah, no, I do agree. But I was thinking a little bit of you guys are talking, and I'm like, why don't we, if we basically change essentially the role of a project manager, individual, is just a person with a set of skills. And so everybody who's in an organization is a person with just a set of skills. And so essentially to get a valuable product or feature or something across the line, what are all the things that we need to do in the organization in its current state to get that product across the line? Now, we've got to meet governance, we've got to fill the documents in. And like the biggest killer for me if I go back to the Scrum team, the biggest killer for me in any Scrum team is, well, that's not my job, that's the tester's job to do that. And I'm not writing that story, I better call the BA to go and do that. And for me, I think that what Scrum was trying to do, but I think it cocked up by calling everybody, engineers. I think kind of put that construct into an engineer. It's an agile thing. It's a technical thing. But if you really break it down, like it's just a person with a set of skills. So if we think about what are all the things that we need to do in the current construct of the organization to get a product out to customer, and list all those things down, could other people in that team pick those things up? Yeah. Does a person who currently has a title of project manager, but if we changed everybody's titles to customer satisfaction engineers, then there's just work that needs to be done to satisfy a need and an outcome, and over the course of time anybody could pick that work up, we could argue. But I dream, but is there a need for a project manager? Yeah, if your organization demands that navigation of the complexity of your organization, sure, I wouldn't stop it. But for me, I forgot to mention, someone mentioned to me a couple of years ago, there are two types of project manager. There are the good ones who really understand and have that cultural element, or there's the tick and flick. So you've got a tick and flick project manager who basically walks around with a clipboard and goes, how did you hit that date? Why haven't you? And then tinkers with PowerPoints all day. Or there's people that are really involved with the people and understand what it is they're trying to do, and live and breathe those core agile values on a day-to-day basis. So for me, yes, there is a need for agile project managers, customer satisfaction engineers, but really if you break it down, just a list of things that need to be done in the current organization to get a product out there, and list all those things out in maybe something called a backlog. I don't, make it up. But there's some things that we need to do to manage that outcome and that product.
Yeah.
As long as someone does it, that's fine.
That's a great point. I'm glad you said there's definitely a need for it. It really validates my career choice. So thank you for that validation.
Can I just add really one quick thing before Steve comes in?
Of course, yeah.
I agree with Mike 100%, pretty much.
Thanks,
I would say if the agile, you're welcome, Mike. We'll talk about the payment later. If the agile project manager focuses on the value not in just delivering whatever the product or service is, but if that person plays a transformational role in the organization, that's the other dimension to the role, that is very valuable, right? I'm delivering your project, but we're changing to Agile, guys. We're transforming to Agile, and I want to be an example of what good can look like, right? So I think that has a lot of value, the transformational aspect of the role as well, and also because of the way the Agile, given the title, I mean, it's just a title, but the way that title is typically placed in organizations, especially enterprises, that person usually has some say, some weight in terms of decision making and so on, which just helps that person do the transformation work up there somewhere, if you know what I mean. Yeah.
Well, yeah, Steve, you're back. I just got one last point to mention on that, just very quickly. Sorry, Nabil.
30 more seconds, go.
The biggest thing we need to do is change the boundary of a project start and end, because the project manager definitely exists. That's great. Their accountability needs to be for delivery of outcome and value, and not the required scope. And if you change that boundary of project, then project managers would always, like the idea is the problem is the boundary of the project. Steve, Matt.
Sorry, I do apologise. My whole computer just shut down, and I have no idea why. I upgraded to Catalina, and there's a problem with customer satisfaction. Catalina on a Mac is not a stable product.
Oh yeah, tell me about it.
I agree completely with what Mike was just saying there, and there's a huge trade-off with projects when they go through between CapEx and OpEx. And their trade-off is they're quite happy to deliver something into production, have it running, and they don't really care about the support concept, all the manual workarounds that has to happen, that the OpEx team has to pick up and keep maintaining until they actually get something back into a project flow to actually remediate a lot of those major challenges. I think the project manager should be responsible for that as well, in terms of trying to minimize the impact in terms of your OpEx spend.
Yeah.
But also want to add in as well that if we think of a Scrum Master as a builder, in terms of it needs to build the team in terms of the way they work and help them be as productive and as much of a team as possible. If we look at a project manager, they're a developer, but they're a developer of people. So they've got to understand people, where they want to go with their career directions, and try and give them opportunities where they can actually start to grow into different roles as well, or different areas of strength, which means working a lot more with their people manager, whatever that is, but trying to give them opportunities to support them as well.
Yeah, definitely great points. Look, we've got a couple of minutes left, and I'm keen to get an answer to the following question. So we've talked a lot about, what project management is, what project managers are, how they work with Agile. So Steve, I'm going to peg this one to you, just as punishment for dropping off. Very quickly, just in like 30 seconds, what are your thoughts on what the future of project management and Agile project managers is?
I think project managers and Agile project managers need to morph into the same conversation. It's not an Agile project manager or a project manager, but their behaviors and the way they interact and support the teams needs to change. So rather than being command and control and just admin, it's more empowerment, servant leadership, but also more of a facilitation and a coordination role. Let me just say that.
Perfect. Yeah. Mike, do you have anything, what you think the future of it is?
Well, I think I covered off a couple of points earlier on. I don't really have much to add to that. I think there's definitely a future. I think that the problem is the project boundary and measured on, and the behaviours that they show is as long as they're in line with Agile values, I think they have a long career ahead.
Great. Sam, any thoughts on the future of PMs and project management?
Echo my two colleagues, and I would add that there is a future in both Agile, a healthy future in both project management and Agile, if the two can actually work together and we stop bickering amongst ourselves, trying to point fingers, because we talk about Agile culture, and I've seen some of the worst behavior from Agile people, and it's a fact. And I just think if we can learn to work together, learn to see the value in different approaches and where they're needed, the future will be much brighter.
And on that note, guys, thank you very much. It is 1 p.m. UK time, so we've got our 1 hour done. Sam, Mike, Steve, thank you very much. It was a fantastic discussion. I can see the guys in the audience, could resonate with some of your answers. And as Medina points out, 10 p.m. in Melbourne. So again, thank you for staying up so late and to bring the energy that you brought today. I appreciate it's very late for you guys.